Sounds of construction are welcoming in today, and I, to celebrate, have two book reviews for you. Yes, I said on Twitter I would be cutting down on book reviews, and then they started performing well. I don't know what the hell's happening, but let's continue the train, because there are two books I finished quite some time ago, but just never got around to reviewing, and that is going to be Dark Age, the latest Red Rising book, and Cibola Burn? Cibola Burn, the fourth book in the Expanse series. And let's go ahead and kick this off with Dark Age, which, getting into it, was a book I had some hesitation and fear with, to be honest. Looking back at my notes, I actually specifically wrote down, like, how is Pierce Brown going to maintain the thrust of this series and not hit, like, middle book slog for this second trilogy? And I do think tinges of that did crack in a little. Not in terms of the pace or narrative, but more in how characters came across. Don't get me wrong, I still love pretty much every character within Red Rising. Darrow is pretty much the most engaging protagonist of sci-fi for me right now, outside of, like, Murderbot. So that was like, I'm still invested, but there were just definite moments of character development or, you know, exploration that felt a bit predictable to me. And maybe that's because I've been sitting with these characters for so long at this point, but I'm definitely wanting Red Rising to come to that satisfying ending I know is just around the corner in that final book. But Dark Age definitely had a lot of strength to it. One, I think it was paced fantastically. It also is exploring themes of how warfare can drive people to become the monsters they often fight against. We even have one of, like, the biggest sci-fi cliches of, like, a gigantic evil weapon utilized by our protagonist. So really showing, like, yeah, there's going to be lines crossed here on all sides, and the political maneuvering and, you know, devastation that people bring onto each other throughout this series continues to just escalate in a way that feels so right and proper. In fact, that's probably my biggest praise for this book overall, is that it is a wonderful escalation. Pierce Brown has really perfected his ability to just continually ramp up the stakes, and Dark Age did feel like the weightiest of Red Rising yet. I actually more and more find a lot of the way he writes, specifically character and character development, to echo of Martin to me, which I haven't heard too many people say, but it really does come across in that sense. Like, I don't know why. Pierce Brown and Martin, I find them to handle character very similarly. This is a new book and is the latest in the series. I'm not going to get into detailed spoilers, but I'm going to say that Darrow and what is happening to him now psychologically feels like an inevitable result of what he's been through and what he's been forced to do. Yet it's still kind of heartbreaking to see someone who has been such a drug as a reader to... The sounds of construction really throw off my cadence. Like, I get on a roll, and then outside someone dumps out a dumpster full of what sounds like metal plates. And the cast of characters around him and seeing how they react to Darrow's continual aggression is probably the most interesting angle to Dark Age, because things are becoming more extreme. We are seeing this war cost so much, and Darrow being willing to go to such extreme lengths to win, because while he's in the right side of things, he has also become a bit of a zealot, someone who's just, I will win at all costs, no matter what. And so, yeah, there are people who are on board, and there are people who are like, that's so bad. But also, yeah, with the devastation he has caused throughout all of society, we are now seeing more and more people be forced to line up to work against him and take on more underhanded tactics to try and stop his holy war, which is really what it's coming across to me like at this point. And because of that, I think this is in several ways actually the most invested I've been in a Red Rising book. I don't think it's my favorite, but it's the one where I'm constantly thinking about how things are going to wrap up, which makes sense. We have one more book left, but it's doing so extremely well. Like, I am in this avalanche of events and backstabbings and violence, and I just want to know where all that snow is going to settle. And maybe the most interesting thing in all of Red Rising is realizing as a reader, Darrow is broken. He cannot function in normal society anymore. The amount of trauma and rage he's been through, he's perpetually stuck in go mode, which is a real thing trauma does to people. And I think Lee Sender is kind of right in that Darrow has no real place if peace ever comes, and that's not a good thing. That means he's always going to find war. And so there's this morality shift happening that I'm very curious about, and I have a lot of thoughts on where it could play out. Because Darrow is dangerous, and not in a good way. So we're entering into a territory of predictability, but that's not bad. Sometimes things are predictable just because they're very well set up and you can see where it's going to go, and it's more about the experience and the emotion communicated through the events that happen, and that's what Dark Age is achieving. It's something I think a lot of fans, if you've been paying close attention, aren't going to be super surprised by, but at the same time, you're still going to very much so enjoy it. Like, you can have a movie spoiled for you, but if it's done on this epic, immersive, passionate level, you're still drawn into it. And I've entered the point now where I get to speculate right along with the most diehard fans, and I doubt it's an unpopular opinion that I'm calling this is going to be a severely tragic ending coming. Like, I do not think Pierce Brown is setting us up to have a wonderful, whimsical, bow on top ending here. Either Darrow will die and his cause will fail, or he will succeed and the cost will be so high that it is inarguably not worth it. Those are the two ways I see this series kind of planning out. I feel like Dark Age was a solid 8.5 out of 10. It could have been a little more subversive and unpredictable, but it is entering into that territory of just a great sci-fi read, especially for those who like the more action-heavy, character-based, space opera-esque level sci-fi adventures, and that's really what we got here. I mean, I can heap on the praises you've heard from me before about Red Rising. The violence and action is some of the most visceral and impactful I've ever experienced in sci-fi or fantasy. The narration, if you're into the audiobook, is some of the best I've ever experienced. The humor lands and never feels out of place. Like, I can just reiterate all these praises for Pierce Brown, but if you've seen any of my other reviews, it feels just redundant this late into the series. So instead, I'm just going to focus on a more meta-level message for the series, and that is that Dark Age seems like the exact right path the series needs to be on to reach that oh-so-cathartic and emotionally gut-wrenching, I'm assuming, ending we all see coming, but how exactly it's going to end still is behind this curtain. And that's what's important, right? I can tolerate some predictability up until that curtain, but if that was starting to peek through and I could see the other side, then I would start to care less. But I know how we're going to get to the ending. I don't know what the ending is going to be. Yeah, I really liked it, and I think Pierce Brown is continuing to show improvement with every book that is either incremental or exponential from the first one. And let's go ahead and jump into the second one here. James A. Corey's Cibola Burn. I know I've finished The Expanse a while ago, and I kind of told you guys my thoughts on the whole series, but I really do want to go through and review each book here because it deserves that. So I'm again coming back to something I read a while ago, so I can't get too much into the details because quite frankly I've forgotten, but I do know my biggest concern going in and the biggest praise and criticism I had for this book. What I will say is this is not my favorite Expanse book by a pretty decent long shot. I just wasn't as invested in the characters anymore. I felt the pacing, while it was fast enough, didn't just motivate me through the pages due to some narrative issues, and the structure just felt a bit more uncomfortable overall. But my biggest fear for this point in the series was addressed, and I actually do need to get into a spoiler for major events up into this book to talk about it. It's unavoidable, so I need to talk about for spoilers for last book to get into that. So before, I'll quickly just say, absolutely, The Expanse is still worth reading. This is still one of the most engaging and interesting sci-fi series going on right now. I had problems with this book. It wasn't as good as the first book, which I think still remains my favorite, but it's still well above good and is so interesting to follow. But let me go ahead and talk about my biggest fear and how that was set up and how it was avoided. So in the last book, we kind of see humanity suddenly have access to countless worlds and the ability to travel like never seen before. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting and engaging. How's the next book going to handle the fallout, though? Because you have two paths. You can get into the political ramification, which unfortunately can come across way too dry and, complicated and just not as interesting unless you are extremely talented at handling that. Or you can go the direct, go through, explore, action route. And obviously it's going to be a little bit of both. And I was just unsure of how that blend was going to go through. Fortunately, I actually think this book did a perfect, and James A. Corey, the author duo, did a better job than I could have possibly expected of balancing those two factors in terms of introducing new threats and really making this new world opportunity come across like a dangerous, wild jungle of space. Like, they don't know what's around the next corner, and there's all kinds of unseen, unknown threats that emerge, but because of course they do. So you can go across all these different space and time, and it's like, oh shit, yeah, there's gonna be problems. So you underline that, use it as your marinade for which is the meat of the story, which is the, again, more political, holy crap ramifications for humanity as a whole. We also have the fact that, like, Mars is kind of useless. Like, all this effort's been put into like making Mars like the next Earth, and it's like, well, we don't f***ing need that anymore. It was never funny in the text, but to me it was very funny that, like, yes, humanity's big hurdle has been trying to make Mars this like habitable place for us, and now we just that's not needed. Obviously, it is still an important place and is a factor in all this, but like the political, and that's actually going into like the political weight, it's weird to refer to two authors by their one, but that's one of the biggest gifts I think we have from these two minds working together on this story, and that's that it feels so thought through. Like, this book really does come across like two really intelligent people talking about and thinking through the ramifications of every angle of their story and the fallout, while keeping it well-paced, structured, and moving along. Because that's one of like the big problems with like big sci-fi concept stuff like this, that also has to weave in action and character development and all these things, because you can get bogged down in all these different angles, and that kind of goes into that worry I had going in. You can get overly bogged down in character, you can get overly bogged down in the concepts. It's so hard to balance it out, but they just did. They just did, and that's impressive. I'm not in love with it, though, because I've just struggled to be as emotionally interested as I was. Like, I'm intellectually stimulated by The Expanse, but I do not have the same passion for the characters as I get from, obvious example, like Red Rising. Like, there's no one here, not even Miller, who I'm as interested in as Darrow, because, like, course not. So this is sitting at a very solid 6.5 to 7 territory, probably closer to a 6.5, where I'm still into the series, and I think the next book has a lot more to bring to the table. I actually think the next book is set up to be, yeah, but this one, it just had so much baggage handed onto it that even with that tremendous balance, I felt it. Like, they did the best they could, but it was so much that I was still struggling a little bit. This needed to simultaneously be like 100 pages more and 100 pages less. And that's like the issue, right? Because like sometimes there's just no perfect right answer in how to deliver everything a book needs to deliver. Like, there's just, you can't. And this is a subjective taste. This is probably someone's favorite Expanse book, and they think they handled it all flawlessly. For my subjective review or opinion, it was kind of damned if it did, damned if it didn't. So it did both. It did it damn well, but not perfect. I feel like I'm coming across submissive as a reviewer. Like, I'm trying to subvert my own criticisms, and that's because I do appreciate, like, this is coming into that territory where, like, I appreciate, on a writer's level, I would never be able to write something this good. It's so well thought through. It's so interesting. There's so many ideas that'll keep you up at night wondering. It's absolutely one of those stories that makes you want to jump into one of these ships and be a part of this. But the emotion's not there. It's all mental for me at this point, and not emotional, which sucks. Like, that's a pretty big criticism, but it speaks to the writers that they're able to overcome that big criticism and get to the point where I'm very excited for the next book, which I'm speaking as if I haven't read it. I have, so I'm trying to fake you out there. And, you know, if, like me, you want to have Disheveled Goblin on your chest because you want to establish to everyone around you just what kind of person you are, be sure to check out the merch store link down below as well. Thank you guys so much for tuning in this latest book review. Like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. And have a good one, y'all. Love you. Peace. And of course, I'd like to record a special shout out to my 2 latest high tier Patreons, Gabriel C. and William Crowther. Thank you guys so much. I'll be getting the Patreon messages soon. I'm just a bit behind on that. Bye.